to another Thiasos meeting. Everybody, everybody can hear me? Yes? Is it okay? Okay, good. So today we'll have a different Thiasos. We have two guests. One very special guest, it is our friend Patricia Maria Martins. Patricia has invited Traci to be here with us today. So she's going to introduce Traci to us and she's going to lead the event. So Patricia is psychologist, master for PUC São Paulo, and she also coordinates a program, a project of Talkings on the Street. Patricia, it's a great pleasure to have you here. Thank you, Lu. I'd like to say good morning to everybody. I think the majority already know me. So first of all, I'd like to thank the invitation that Thiasos made me to be here this morning. And for me, this has this is a party because we are going to put in touch into touch three communities that we have. My community of friends, the community of Jungian Analysts of Thiasos, and the community of Sidewalk Talk with some volunteers that are here today with us. And yesterday we had the privilege to listen to Luigi Turinesi talking about the imaginal community. And today at Thiasos, we're going to have the opportunity to listen to Traci. She's going to tell us about the reflections and the experiences that she's been living, that she's been having since she founded a Sidewalk Talk in 2014 when she decided to occupy the streets in San Francisco and listen to people, creating, multiplying the spaces to hear people, and the construction of communities from the Latin comunitas, community and companionship. The art of listening to the polis is a communication tool, dialogue, and political communication. So she's going to share with us her experience that goes beyond our therapy rooms, something that we've been discussing in our Thiasos meeting. She's American and now she lives in Germany. She is adult psychotherapist, also couple, master in psychosomatic psychology, graduated in political science from the University of Santa Barbara, social activist, and the founder of the Sidewalk Talk. So before she starts, I'd like to ask you, because she gave the suggestion that as she talks, you can write in the chat in English or Portuguese. She's going to follow the free associations, the images that come up while you are listening to her, because she like to know what you're feeling, what you're thinking, as if it were this sidewalk meetings. And since we have now only the communication through chat during her presentation, so feel free to write. Not right now, but just associating your ideas and writing the chat while she's talking. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Traci. This is really a dream come true. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and to say that I am not a Jungian analyst. However, my first analyst for 7 years was a Jungian analyst, so I have been analyzed. But I'm excited to learn from you. So that's part of the reason I really am excited to have you contribute in the chat, not just your free associations, but theorists, quotes, people that are coming to mind. I'd like this to be a co-creative space. So be brave and just use that chat and let yourself drift in and out of dreamlike state as I'm talking, and let us be in a co-creation if that's okay with you. I'm going to share the screen. I don't have slides that have a lot of text on them, so maybe the slides are mostly for me, but if at some point the community prefers that I turn the slides off, I'm okay with you telling me that. Let me just begin. And I kept some notes. I don't script talks. I'm too spontaneous for that, but I did keep some notes so that I don't over talk. So here's the journey we're going to go on here a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the intention, which I think I kind of shared. For me, my largest core value is learning. Learning and play are my two biggest values. I'm very playful. So there may be some irreverence. I might curse. That's kind of, if that's a problem, let me know. I'm going to tell you about becoming a therapist and going from corporate life to therapy more from a psychological perspective so that you can understand the elements and the archetypal pieces of my own that led me to the sidewalk. And I'll have a particularly good time sharing with you the dream that arose that led me to the sidewalk. And we're going to analyze my therapist chair a little bit together. And then I'm going to spend the most time of our session together today talking about actual stories from the sidewalk. I'll talk about a few of my cases and how Sidewalk Talk has changed and is changing the way that I constellate my casework. So I've been practicing for 16 years now. I started out my training primarily in Gestalt therapy, and I'm getting ready to do a 3-month state of depth work with a Jungian analyst to do deep shadow work with a group of 10 women for twice weekly for 12 weeks. I'm excited about that. I'll mention a few thinkers that have influenced me, but they're certainly not all the thinkers, and what's come up, where I am now in the project and where I hope it goes. So I hope that that works for everyone. So that's where I'm going to pull out my notes. So I'm going to be on this slide for a little bit. I actually think it's more fun to look at your faces than my big lioness hair there. So I'm going to turn that off for a sec. I started, when I graduated from college, when I went to college at UC Santa Barbara, I actually paid my way through college. I didn't have a wealthy family. I was a first college graduate, and I didn't have time to finish all the reading. So what I learned was that I learn well in community. And so that's part of why I want you to free associate in the chat, that today I really created a mashup of all my favorite thinkers to share with you what were all the influences that led me from corporate life to therapy to the sidewalk. I said that I had trained in Gestalt therapy, but I'll tell you a funny story. When I first entered graduate school, my faculty advisor was a Freudian analyst and researcher. And I asked him, hey, what is psychodynamics? And, uh-oh. I'm going to just put that person on mute. There we go. What is psychodynamics? And he said, oh, it's the study of Freud. And I said, oh, I think Freud is shit. He said, huh, that's interesting. I'm one of the world's leading researchers on Freud. And I said, gosh, I feel like a real asshole now. He goes, well, I think it's funny how many anal retentive associations you've just made in the first 2 minutes of meeting you. Which I'm like, oh, great. And then when I actually took his class, I couldn't live that one down. I primarily trained in Gestalt, sensory motor psychotherapy, Hakomi, trauma therapy. I certified in EMDR. Along the way, though, the unconscious kept sneaking out. And I'm like, what's going on here? And so I did enter a psychoanalytic consult group with a Freudian. Was in that group for 2 years, and it really radically changed kind of how I saw things. Although Freud isn't my guy, I think Jung is more my guy. Most of my work is couples work. I think I still like to work in the concrete. I'm getting certified right now in internal family systems. But what was interesting is in this entire journey during those 5 years of training, I was in a women's painting group. And I was painting the whole time. And my father's a painter, and he came up and he looked at this 5 years worth of paintings. He said, oh, you split every one of your paintings in half into 2 paintings. And I have continued to be mesmerized by the paradox that I was painting and what I was trying to unearth in that process. So now I'm going to move on. This would be where I change slide, but it's just a placeholder. I want to say a little bit about the dream that I had that led to Sidewalk Talk. So at the time, there was a context that all of this was happening. We had just had a big school shooting in the United States where a young boy had entered an elementary school and shot close to 60 5 and 6-year-old kids. And then we also had a bomb that went off at the Boston City Marathon. Previous to the year, we had someone show up in a movie theater and shoot a bunch of people in the movie theater. And I was already beginning to wonder, okay, psychotherapy is not actually solving this problem. Oh, I should mention too, during my journey in my studies of psychotherapy, I was completely mesmerized and pissed off by James Hillman's book, There's Been 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World is Getting Worse. And so here I was paying all this money to study psychotherapy. And then James Hillman is telling me, you're probably not going to make much of an impact. I'm like, great. I'm spending close to $150,000 US to study this field, and maybe I'm going to make things worse. So at this time, I realized as I was talking to friends, and at the time I was running a psychotherapy magazine. I'm now 2 years into my licensure, so I've been practicing for about 7 years. Um, a lot of my therapist colleagues were writing think pieces, analyzing what was going on in the culture. And for some reason, that felt elitist to me. I'm like, I don't want to analyze what's going on in the culture. Do we really know? Because you're analyzing the culture from your lens. That's still your lens. How are you going to really find out? And then I had a dream. And the dream was this. I had a dream that I have a big leather chair in my therapy office. It's more like a throne. It's so large that I can actually curl up in it. You could probably fit 3 people in my chair. It has big, huge armrests, large enough that I could put a cup of tea on the actual armrest. And the chair is interesting because I can literally sit cross-legged with no shoes on in the chair, and I often did. So I was a bit of a juxtaposition because I'd be very informal in my posture, but this chair was like a throne. And I had a dream, how could I get that chair in the elevator of my building, because I was on the 11th floor, into the elevator by myself, have it go all the way down to the street, push it out the front door, onto the street, and sit there. And then I thought, but that chair is so big. It's like a throne. What kind of chair would I give the other person to sit in? Do I have to get another chair the same size? So this dream wouldn't let me go. And I'm like, what is going on here? And then finally I decided, I talked to a few colleagues, let's go sit on the sidewalk. Now, marketing and branding and capitalism loves to twist this stuff around and make it about loneliness or helping people or street therapy. For me, it was never that. It was always an experiment, and it was always a response to this dream. So I wish I could tell you that I had some grand master plan. I did not, but this dream wouldn't let me go. And I knew that I learn in community, and I learn from storytelling, and I learn from listening to people. So 28 colleagues of mine got together in a room and planned what were the safety implications of listening on the sidewalk, and how could we set this up in a way that felt safe for everyone. And it was a really cool experience. I'm going to show you a video really quick. Share. I'm going to stop presenting. Oh, there's the chair. It's a similar chair, but I'm going to show you this video. Bear with me here. I'm going to leave the sound off, so don't be annoyed that there's no sound. The music on this video is really, I don't love it. It's really, but I want you to see what happens. Hopefully the resolution will get better. It's only 1 minute. I'm a little sad the resolution isn't so great. He's 15 years old. She's actually Brazilian, this girl. Okay, so I'll come back. Maybe just notice what's happening in your body and type anything that comes up for you in the chat. Give yourself a moment to just wonder about that. So, what was really interesting about that very, very first time that I listened on the sidewalk was this dethroning, in essence, that happened for me. Because what actually was happening is, unlike when you're a therapist where you have a captive audience because the person is coming to you supposedly to reduce a symptom or for help. In this instance, I'm the vulnerable one sitting there offering myself openly to be rejected over and over and over again. And I am rejected over and over and over again. People don't always think it's charming. People don't always smile. I've had people flip me off. I've been spit on before. I've been attacked thinking that I was a politician trying to promote certain political ideals. So suddenly I'm not in this safe leather chair anymore. And it became this opportunity to really play with, wow, how am I using power as a therapist to hide behind a whole bunch more complexity that's happening on the street? We then, so we began listening more and more, and I'll share a few more stories just really in rapid succession. I am going to share again because I want to show you the pictures. So I'll leave this next one for a little bit because I think the pictures are also so fun to look at. If I can get the screen to shrink. There we go. Okay. So one of the early experiences I had on the sidewalk, I'm white. I live in a multicultural city, and I had a therapist colleague come out and sit in my chair, and she screamed at me about racial privilege and that I was being a white savior sitting out on the sidewalks. And what she needed is she needed to really be heard around white supremacy and white saviorism in the field of psychotherapy. I had another listening experience where we went out and listened in the Castro, which is a gay neighborhood in San Francisco. It was 2 days after the nightclub shooting in Miami or Orlando, the Pulse nightclub. We had 12 volunteers show up on 48 hours notice. Every chair was full the entire time we were there. My sons came with me, who at the time were 6 and 8, and they said to me, my youngest at 6 said, "I think you need to stop doing sidewalk talk." And I said, "Why is that?" And he said, "Because you make people incredibly unhappy. Everybody that sat in your chair today started crying." And I said to him, "Do you think that that made them unhappy, or do you think that they needed their tears to be heard?" Then we did a bus tour across the South. We had 8 of us. We raised some money. We flew into Chicago, Illinois, and we drove from Chicago through Indiana, Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky. I'm trying to think of all the southern states, listening to Trump voters. We were actually sponsored by the Islamic Society and the Human Rights Institute. And on 2 of our stops, we didn't have a lot of money, so we were sleeping in attics. We were being fed by churches, and the imam at the local mosque in Birmingham, Alabama, invited us in for traditional prayers and fed us after listening in Birmingham, Alabama, which both Louisville, Kentucky and Birmingham, Alabama have been hot spots in some of the racial injustice and police brutality in the United States. And so to really be a part of a community that is holding space in a broader way was a real privilege. They also invited us to bring in cameras and shoot our entire experience with them. I had another experience with a woman, and unlike in the therapy office where we're mindful of self-disclosure, we were sitting outside of an event, and it was a neurodiversity event. So there were a lot of different folks whose brains worked very differently than my own. And this woman said to me, I feel really lonely. I feel really isolated. Do you ever feel that way? And I said to her, I do. And she said, I want to hear more. And so I told her about my own experience with loneliness. And she said to me, more than any therapy or anything I've ever experienced, your willingness to say, me too, I feel lonely too, was the most moving experience of sitting with you today. Another day on the sidewalk in San Francisco, this young guy, he looked like a tech bro, as we call them in San Francisco. You kind of like get annoyed with them, and it's like they're oozing white male privilege out their pores, and you kind of roll your eyes a little bit. Walks by and he's got a hat on leaning side, kind of tipped sideways, and I'm making all kinds of judgments about him. He's got a swagger, he's got a crooked smile, and all I could think was, yeah, he's not going to sit down. But he did. He sat down, and I was actually on the ground that day. We didn't have enough chairs, and he sat on the ground with me. And he smiled, and he was a bit, playful, and he was compensating a bit for how much pain he was holding. And then he just stopped, and he said, I'm 26, and I started my first job, and I've been doing it for 4 years at a financial institution. I go to work in the morning and I sit in a cube, and not one person says hello to me when I arrive or says goodbye to me when I leave. And all I can think is, this what my life is going to be like? And then he cried and said nothing for about 5 to 10 minutes. And we just eye gazed while he cried. This was not what I thought was going to happen with this young man. And then I reached across, something that I don't do as a therapist, and I just wiped one of his tears, and then just sat and let him continue to cry. And it was the most intimate, human, soulful moment. And then he said, I feel so much better. I'm going drinking with my buddies. I'll see you later. And he left, and I never saw him again. Another woman came and sat down in my chair. She was an Asian woman. I'm not sure what part of Asia. She was in her middle to late 50s, and she had crumpled up hair and food all over her clothes. And I thought, oh, she must be one of the bottle collectors that collects the bottles out of the trash cans in San Francisco based on her appearance. She sits down and she proceeds to tell me that she is a ranked chess player, and that in fact her daughter is a famous scientist, and that she spends a large sum of her retirement funds going to very expensive spas all over the United States. And then she proceeded to say that she really liked Sidewalk Talk, and shared an experience that she had that day on the bus, sitting next to a little girl who was trying to learn to read. And she sat and helped the little girl learn to read. She is one of the many stories where my own bias is shifted. Then I had another young woman sit down. She didn't speak any English. I'm not even sure where she was from. She tried to say a few things, that she was sad, that she felt alone. She felt uncomfortable, but she decided to stay. And it was another one of those listening in silence moments where we just sat. And the energy that I'm always carrying when I do this is that I'm your equal, that the pain that lives in you lives in me. And that's the biggest change that's happened for me, is that I no longer feel any sort of separation, that somehow I'm helping this person in any particular way, but that I actually, and I think this is why people go deep with me, that I actually feel a deep sense of equality, deep sense of respect, a deep sense of honoring for how they are a reflection of me and I'm a reflection of them in so many ways. This picture in the top right corner, I just found. I've not shared it publicly because I don't own the copyright on this photo. But it was one of my most profound listening experiences I've had in my life. Wasn't planning on sharing it, but if it's okay, I'd like to share it with this community. I was up in Portland, Oregon. It was Mental Health Awareness Month, and we were actually sitting outside the Capitol, where actually all the mothers have been doing Black Lives Matter protests for the last year after George Floyd's murder. And this man comes walking by, and he sits on a bench right near our chairs. And I'm like, in this ginormous, gigantic park, of all the benches he could have sat on, he decided to sit on the bench that was really, you can see the chair of the woman in the red hair there, really close to us. And I'd seen him walk by, and he's wearing a tie and slacks, and he's pulling a laptop computer on a roller. So I imagined that he was a lawyer that worked in the building. So again, another bias or assumption. He sits, and I walk by him because I'm getting ready to head back on a plane. And I said to him, "How's your day going?" He said, "It could be better." And so I slid in right next to him and I said, "Do you want to talk about it?" And then he proceeds to tell me that he was at the courthouse that day because he was on parole. And he told me the story about what he had been arrested for. He shared with me his experience of being Black in America. And I listened to him with a different lens, without the white savior lens or a helper lens. Actually, this man and I had a similar kind of way of talking and a similar sense of humor. You know how it is when you meet some people. I feel this way with Patrizia. You meet some people and you just go, "Oh, they're my people. I don't know why this person is my person, but I'm like, we have a thing. We had a thing, an ease with us." And I didn't do the reflective repeat back everything he said. I just was so moved. And I said, I'm going to try to make up a name because I won't ever forget his name. I'll call him Daryl. I said, Daryl, I know that you're wrestling with all this stuff and I'm not trying to make you feel better, but God, the integrity, you are a really good man. That's all I said to him. And he started sobbing. And then he literally let his whole body fall into my arms while he sobbed. And then he gathered himself and his story changed. He started talking about what he wants to do with his life, that his life was no longer just about the bad stuff, but about what he wanted to create. And in this whole dialogue, I'm keeping in mind power and privilege. And I wanted him to know that I was feeling an equality between the two of us. I said, "Hey, David, I gotta go." He goes, "Yeah, it was nice meeting you." Oh, I said his name. "Nice meeting you, Traci." And I said, I have an ask of you. And he says, "What's that?" I said, "If you ever see me sitting on a park bench looking like I need to be listened to or a hug, would you be willing to sit down and do the same for me?" He said, "Absolutely." And I've never seen him again. The last story I'll tell is the story of being a leader. By far, this stuff that happens on the sidewalk is the easiest part of the job. The worst part of Sidewalk Talk is leading the thing. Because look, you know, I'm totally fine getting people's shadow projections and negative projections as a therapist. I don't effing want it by people that I lead, but it just is what happens. I'm sitting here talking to you guys. I might be on a TV show or on a podcast, and people have this whole story about who I am. And I'm like, oh my God, I am just a neurotic freak like everybody else. I'm not these things that you think that I am. And that part has been really, really hard, and it draws a lot of shadow. I've had a lot of interesting acting out. Um, uh, and sometimes I'm willing to hold the shadow for people and act out myself all over the place, not to mention my own shadow stuff. Yeah, I've gotten myself into some pickles because I'm a bit rebellious. So then when people are being kind of aggressive with me, I'll lovingly step right into the enactment and tussle with them. So I'm learning not to do that, which is really, really good. All right. So I'll say a little bit about my cases. I'm going to go back because then you guys are going to look at those books and we're not going to go there just yet. So the number one question people ask, they ask me, well, how has this changed your clinical work? It's really humanized me more. I think that, and I've supervised interns now, and the thing I notice from interns is they feel so compelled to prove their efficacy as a therapist. Like, I have to see the client change in some way, or the client must be more steady, or they must improve, or I must do some intervention that creates some big ab reaction, some big catharsis, so that I, as the therapist, can feel good about the job that I'm doing. Right. And I'm like, ooh, yeah, ooh. Sidewalk Talk has cured me of that. Right. I feel really, really like I'm bringing my full humanity into that room in a different way. And I guess I do have, I have a, and again, I know you guys are analysts, so you're working with material in a different way, but if I can't love you, I don't work with you. I should say, if I can't love and hate you, I won't work with you. um, because I feel like the capacity to be in the struggle together and not need stuff to happen is where the magic happens, right? This is where, you know, when we're holding paradox and finding the meaning in that paradox and not needing somebody, like the minute you feel like you need to fix something means that you already thought something was broken in the first place, right? And I don't look at people that way. You know, I frequently will have a client come in and I do trust myself a little bit more. I'll have some kind of free association or some kind of image that comes in, or something happens in my body, and I can use the countertransference in a much different way because of Sidewalk Talk, where I'm not using the information to back up from the client and chin scratch and analyze, but to lean in and use it as information about the relational field, right? And go, huh, right? How is what I'm feeling what they're not able to feel, which you guys all know, but how can I express it in a way that I'm putting it in the soup so that they're maybe willing to take a bite of that soup, or it makes the soup a little more delicious, you know? Um, I had a guy, well, I don't want to get the specifics, but I'll say I have had people with intractable depression. And I threw everything at this guy and tried to, like, I mean, it was suicidal, really scary kinds of depression. And at the end of the day, what this guy needed was, he needed poetry, he needed music, and he needed friends. And sometimes we overcomplicate things sometimes. And I keep thinking about that. And I think about him a lot when I'm working on Sidewalk Talk, because I'm like, if our society was structured differently, would he have been depressed in the first place? And I'm convinced the answer to that is no. That his depression was not inside of him. His depression was a societal issue. You see the picture of this gal down here hugging one of her, or touching one of her listeners. Like, we used to live in communities that did that. We would take our time, we would touch. Our humanity was the first thing that mattered. If he lived in that world, he wouldn't have been in my office, for sure. I also have clients that will come in and loneliness is their fundamental issue. Their fundamental issue is an issue of the society, but they have been over therapized in some regards, really fundamentally believing that their problem is theirs. And I keep coming back to this idea, and this is a new book out, actually, I highly recommend. He is a Black Freudian analyst in the UK, and his brain, oh, I just love talking to people like this. I got to have him on the podcast, so you get to hear him, but his name is Dr. Dwight Turner. He's not only a great clinician, he's a really great professor. I can tell when I interviewed him on the podcast because he's so accessible. Sorry if you're Freudian, but some Freudians speak in code sometimes, and I feel like I can't join them in the conversation because they're like up here somewhere. I'm like, it feels like, okay, I'm going to be really inappropriate now, so let me be inappropriate. It just feels like they're intellectually masturbating. I'm like, God, Dwight doesn't do that. He is just so, his book is called, I'll put it in the comments, Intersections of Privilege and Otherness in Counseling and Psychotherapy. And he really talks about the process of being socialized as inciting the death instinct in us, and that it completely warps our identity and sense of self. Now I guess I'm getting to the theorist piece, right? You'll get to hear him on the Sidewalk Talk podcast. He's brilliant, and probably would be a great person at some point to have come talk to Thiasos, because he's such a dynamic teacher as well. But to me, what he really taught me was that we can think of psychotherapy, and I think this might even be his quote, we can think of psychotherapy as a tool to teach people to adapt to the society with which we live in, or we can think of psychotherapy as a tool to liberate the soul. and I prefer the latter. This first book, Constructing the Self, Constructing America by Philip Cushman, I've tried to get him on the podcast. He's brilliant. He's not a big social media guy, as you can imagine. He's a Freudian, but pretty eclectic Freudian. This book is really taking this idea, how psychotherapy came to America, how it got marketed, how we were able to start selling it to people and getting people to come in and pay for therapy, and what was going on socio-politically at the same time that therapy was sort of coming up. This book is, it's just dog-eared. I just constantly am like peeling through it, right? But particular to American society, in order to promote therapy, you know, Freud's, I think it was it his nephew or his cousin, became a master of public relations, and he used the ideas of the unconscious to learn how to build and market and brand companies. So he learned how to use the tenets of the unconscious to draw us to buy stuff. And what Philip Cushman says is that unlike other societies, that the American self is a self built on the empty self. And if we have an empty self, then we have to fill that empty self. So it helps us become better consumers, better builders, and better workers, right? Because we're now using all those things to fill that empty self. And that psychotherapy becomes a vehicle for attempting to fill the empty self rather than to liberate the self. So I think this is fascinating. Faye bound. So I already told you about this book that really pissed me off with James Hillman and Michael Ventura when I was in grad school, because I'm like, what am I spending all my money on? Oh my God, I'm just going to make people worse. A Biography of Loneliness by Faye bound Alberti. So she is a this is a fascinating field. She's a historian who studies medical history. And so she studies the history of the human body throughout time and how we've treated the human body. And she made this link that loneliness kind of launched itself at a time when she said in the 18th century, two things happened. We started to believe that we had direct access to the divine. We didn't need an interlocutor anymore. We didn't need a tabernacle. We didn't need a priest. And suddenly these divine experiences, you know, we could embody on our own. But second, we started to really mechanize or medicalize the human body. And the Cartesian split and the I think, therefore I am, we also started to treat the body as object rather than body as the lived experience. So therefore, she says, she believes, and this is from her lens, the body is the source, the starting place. And of course, I'm a somatic psychotherapist, so I love this, of reclaiming our sense of community and connection and healing, that we somehow have to find our ways back into our body. So you can listen to that on the podcast. Because I'm getting ready to do this 12-week long Jung shadow thing, kind of built around Dr. Claire Pinkola Estes' work. I've been doing some of my own reading. I'm reading Robert Johnson's book on the gifts of the shadow, and just loved the whole section on romantic love and how, you know, he writes that with the decline of church in modern Western society, we have replaced that sort of desire for the ecstatic, where we would have access to the divine, with romance. So romance is the religion of our time. It's how we're sort of having the ecstatic experiences that we started to believe we could have once we started having direct access to the divine. And I just thought, because half my practice is working with couples, and I see this all the time. My mother was married 6 times. I've been in therapy for 25 years, I should say, probably because my mother was married for 6 times. It wasn't such an easy childhood. But she was in love with that ecstatic. She was in love with being in love. she wanted that religion. She wanted that access to that kind of divinity that happens, right, when we're able to fall in love and be intoxicated by that experience. And you can see with the dating apps that people are having a hard time. Like, it's like, oh, let's see, is there another like new divine experience that I'm going to have with this next person? And oh, it doesn't look too electric, so I'm going to move on to the next one. And we're just, yeah, we're sort of being sensitized for that. I did also recently get to have a conversation with Niobe Way from NYU. And I don't know if you're familiar with Niobe's work. Um, she's a neuroscientist who has been studying social connection and loneliness. And I am excited because I was just invited to come train with her. Her project called Patch. So she started out as a school teacher working with inner city kids, and then went back and has studied loneliness and neuropsychology and human connection. And she works alongside Carol Gilligan, who you may know. She's a feminist psychotherapist and a cultural anthropologist. And she's really, what Niobe said to me, and she's a badass. She's a big time activist, but she said, look, we're not going to solve racism, sexism, transphobia, or any of this stuff in society until we solve the problem that we are built to dehumanize. Everything in our society is built to dehumanize. So you solve one of these problems, you're just going to find another way to dehumanize somebody else. You've got to get at the root of the problem, which is everything that we have built has been designed to dehumanize one another. And I just, of course, thought that was super groovy. So now I know I've been chasing her for 3 years. So to finally get her on the podcast was like a huge, I couldn't sleep the night before and I was so excited. And she's probably one of my heroes. And then I'll say more about this. I'll just finish my theoretical thinking with Rollo May. Please enter lots of stuff in the chat, other people you want me to read, because I really want all that stuff. But this quote from Rollo May, he talks about how the hollow among us are bound to become more lonely, no matter how much they lean together, for hollow people do not have a base from which to learn to love. And that always sticks with me when I think about the structures that we're building incentivize a hollow self. So where am I now? This is the closing part of my talk, and we can move into some interaction. I have changed, right? I've been through a full journey. It's been 6 years now that I've been leading Sidewalk Talk. I've certainly had moments of grandiosity. It was titillating to have a video go viral and viewed 10 million times. I have been in the depths of shadow material where I'm like, I'm just a narcissistic asshole. Who the heck am I? I have been really looking at where I stand in terms of power and activism, finding my own feet when it comes to how do I hold different aspects of myself. And what's really happened, and the pleaser in me, I definitely have some of the classic yes girl, also that capitalist, bigger is better, scale is better. And I'm learning, no, that's not actually true. Connected is better. And so I was easily sucked into that part of it. So now Sidewalk Talk, for me, I'm really learning, what does conscious capitalism or conscious growth look like? So I've been doing a lot of work around that. What is the real distinct why? For me, it's culture change. 2, it's experimentation. And 3, it's not helping people. It's getting more people to learn how to connect as humans. And trying to get people, the media doesn't ever get that message right when they cover a project, and it really pisses me off. It's about learning how to connect with people as humans and do so in a way that removes or at least helps people indict their bias, understand more about holding context and nuance, to understand where they come from and how where they come from is influencing how they're meeting that person in the exchange. I think regular people can learn that stuff. I really, really do. So Sidewalk Talk is increasingly focused on practicing and teaching listening skills, not fixing or healing people, right? Personally, I am immersing myself more in the poetic and art and mythology, and I'm a little less like staccato and bullet pointed, and I don't know, I'm sort of listening to where things are going and not always so clear, and just kind of following the flow of what's happening and tracking systems and thinking about I'm thinking a lot about technology. I have to say I've been really crabby. I get technologists that reach out to me all the time and want to build an app for Sidewalk Talk. And I say, I don't want to build an app for Sidewalk Talk, but you should, it's you got this brand awareness. I'm like, that you don't, then you're not understanding what this project is about. Because you as the app maker, your unconscious is now already codifying the interaction. Because the minute you decide how that user interface is designed, you have removed the entire poetry of the experience. And I have actually an app maker who's on next week for the podcast, and he's amazing. He's this Frenchman and he's so poetic, but I just don't want I don't want an app. So we're never going to have an app. And it's going to really piss people off, but I don't want an app. I've also been fascinated by the psychology of nonprofits. Boy, there's some really interesting shadow stuff in nonprofit work. Wow, I had no idea. There's a lot of saviorism, ton of paternalism. Like, remember how I said my interns, they need the client to kind of come in and be sick so that they can feel like a good therapist? Nonprofits need problems to stay so that they can feel really good that they're going off and fixing stuff. There's some of that shadow stuff in nonprofits that I'm like, whoa, that is a trip. And then I told you that I'm doing my own deep shadow work. And where I am the most is I'm doubting my field. I'm doubting my field. I got a call from a big insurance. There are a lot of these insurance providers that are popping up in the Silicon Valley where they're going to Google and Facebook and Uber and saying, we're going to provide this entire wraparound mental health insurance infrastructure for your staff. And one of these companies, the assistant called and said, hey, our CEO wants to be on the Sidewalk Talk podcast. And I'm thinking, I wonder if she ever looked up that I actually interviewed to be a provider for them and they rejected me because I'm not a CBT and DBT therapist. I don't want to negate CBT and DBT therapists, but the fact that these folks with so much power and influence and wealth and funding are determining the direction of psychotherapy, stripping out the poetry and the soul. I mean, the poetry and the soul has already been stripped out of therapy, right? But it's getting worse, not better. And it pisses me off to no end if I'm fired up about something. So I didn't call her back, although secretly I should, and have her on and have a provocative conversation. But this idea that psychotherapy is being used to dust people off, get them functioning again, and shove them back to work so they can be good cogs in the machine really worries me. Really, really worries me. And so if I'll say where I am now with the whole process and what Sidewalk Talk has taught me is that how do psychotherapists create social change on a massive scale? And for me, I'm interested in getting out on the sidewalk because I feel like every time we're out there and I block somebody's footpath, there is a provocation in that says something's going on here. Even when they scratch their head and think it's weird. And it may not be weird in Brazil. Maybe you guys are just so much more friendly than the Silicon Valley is. I mean, I'm so interested in doing more listening in different locations around the world. But this idea that there is a kind of consciousness raising that happens when we're sitting there, and that we're changing the culture. And I wish that we could get more. I just want to come up with more creative. I'd like there to be more art. I think we need people doing. I once met this guy and I still want to do something with him. He has this ginormous quilt. It's the size of a city block. And he uses recycled clothing to make the yarn. And he has people sit in the middle of city squares and start, it's not a quilt, I'm sorry, it's a knitting. And he teaches them how to knit or crochet. I'm not good at that stuff, but I went and did it. It was at a Burning Man Light kind of event. And it was amazing. People just start sitting around and start knitting together, and you all start talking. But what was really cool is he's this big, muscly guy with a, a t-shirt on. He didn't look like a guy that's going to be knitting. So it was even perfect, the juxtaposition. And I think that those kinds of projects, we need more of these social projects that create a protest through connection, that reclaims soul in some kind of way, that says, damn it, I'm not going to live in a soulless world anymore. I'm not going to do it. So that's all I came prepared to talk about. That's my story. Little all over the place, but it's a free association. So thank you for having me here and for letting me share and hearing my story. It was more fun to come talk about this because I knew I could say all the crazy stuff that I wouldn't dare say, like on a news channel or something. Because some people would be like, what is she talking about? So thanks for letting me come talk about all the deep stuff. Oh, there's questions. Well, good. We'll get to some of those questions. So who do I hand it back to?
Traci, queria agradecer imensamente a tua fala.
Traci, it's Patricia here. I'd like to thank you so much for your presentation. I could be hours here listening to you. I could never imagine that we would have this meeting thinking about the experiences on the street. So what you said brought me back to my street experience. I'm really willing to go back. So what would you like to do now? Would you like to see the comments from the participants in the chat, or would you like to go to the questions?
I'd like to ask the community what the community wants to co-create.
Vamos abrir para as perguntas, então, Tati?
Okay, so
Vamos abrir para as perguntas?
okay, so we are going to open for the questions now. Is that okay? So Traci, Patricia is making the first question. Thinking about this shadow issue, what do you think about this moment that we are living, not only because of the COVID-19, but also because of the political issues that we are facing, economical issues. So how do you think that the sense of community is going to win this war against Thanatos? And how can we think about a sense of community after the crisis that we are facing? I think that both Brazil and United States has some similarities. So I like to listen to you about this possibility of the sense of community when facing so many hardships and winning this war against Thanatos and the death.
And I would welcome everybody weighing in and talking about this together in the chat too. I'll just share with you some broad brushstrokes. I wrote a piece a few years ago called "There's a Donald Trump Living in All of Us," and it really pissed off some of my San Francisco colleagues. Because I'm like, whoa, that's pretty easy to just make this guy the bad guy. But it seems to me like he's a reflection of something that lives in all of us. And we probably need to start there and look at our own narcissism, our own unloved and uncared for and unhated and our hated self. We need to look at what produced him and how it's produced parts of us. And you can see this this quality of, when you look at a system that's designed for competition, right? And that your identity and worth are about winning, and perhaps even your survival is about winning. This goes back to what I'd said about dehumanization and Niobe Way's work. we don't give ourselves much room to win against dehumanization. Like, how am I saying this? I don't mean to sound hopeless, but I was just on a call last week with all these researchers, the top researchers in the world on loneliness, and they're still using the capitalist conquering lens. And I think if we use that conquering lens, I think it's already that lens that's the problem, right? So even in this conversation right now, you asked me, Traci, where do you want to go next in the conversation? I say, what does the community want to co-create in the conversation? And I really learned this from a racism listening circle that I was facilitating through Sidewalk Talk. This older Black woman joined. She goes, oh, great, another white woman that's setting the agenda again. And I said, man, you're right. Let's co-create this agenda. The challenge is that co-creation takes more time, and we're in an environment that doesn't like to take time. We want things to be really fast and efficient. But I think that the fundamental change that's going to need to happen is co-creation and a shifting away from competition. That's just my free association at the moment. Let me change my mind 10 minutes from now, because I probably will, but that's what's coming up for me. What do you have to say?
Muito obrigada.
Na verdade, não é muito sobre isso, mas eu queria fazer uma
Truly, I'd like to make a question. It's not about that, but I like to make a question. Here is Luciana. I'd like to thank you. Thank you for your presence. I loved your presentation. I loved what you said. It was really delicious. I really didn't see time passing, to tell you the truth, when you were speaking. So, as an archetypal psychologist, I'd like to defend a little bit James Hillman, and in this book that you mentioned. I like to say that the title is a little bit more pessimistic than the content of the book. So in the book, he says a lot of things that are similar to what you brought us today. So many things I can associate with what you presented to us. And you said that he says that our therapy rooms must be revolutionary cells. And I think that you're doing this with your Sidewalk Talk project. This is the first thing I like to comment. And afterwards, I kept myself with this word that is the mechanization of the bodies, with this expression. There is a book here in Brazil, that a book from Silvia Federici, that is called The Caliban and the Witch. And she talks a lot about body and capitalism. And I think that you are referring a little bit to this in this mechanization of the bodies. And you said about the return, the way back to the body, and putting everything together, the Sidewalk Talk, the community projects. Can we gather the way back to the bodies with this? Can we have it with this project that you are leading now? Through this project is return to the body.
I like James Hillman. I just wasn't liking him at that time. Yeah, I think that we can and must get back to the body. You know, we had this young woman that I met, and frankly, she's just more in her body than I am. I felt quite intimidated by her, but she led a Sidewalk Talk event that I attended. I think we had 27 people out in Union Square one day. And she started us all off teaching us Tai Chi movements and mudras on different ways to set boundaries, to channel energy, to ground. And I'm like, whoa, I love this. So again, this is also why I like co-creation, because then I got to be in this experience of learning. And she was very young. She was in her middle 20s. And I have found two groups of people that, you know, the folks that have wealth right now are of a particular age. And I'm finding that I really like listening to I've been in dialogue with a retired Jewish analyst who's 75. Since the election, I've been kind of stressed. So I've needed to have my own listening, have someone listen to me. And so she has done some space holding for me. And then I love what young people, as much as millennials are getting picked on or teased, I actually find hope in these young folks. I find them to be, at least the ones that I've gotten to interact with, not entirely driven by money and really challenging power in the way that it's been set up in ways that I find quite delicious. They scare the shit out of me at the same time because I'm old, but I'm totally inspired by them too.
Traci.
Obrigada, Traci.
Traci, Patricia speaking. Thinking about this co-creation point that you just brought up, would you like to read the comments that we had?
Sure. Yes, please. And let's.
Oh, Luis would like to make a question first. Okay, let's go.
First, can you teach me how to say shit in Portuguese?
Merda.
Merda. Oh, it's like French.
Merda. Merda. Exactly. the same origin. Traci, I'd like just to point out something here. It's very brief. I'm following Patricia's work since the beginning, and I think that it's a combination of the same intentions of the Sidewalk Talk project in Brazil. And Patricia has this issue of this possibility of as a Jungian psychology to work with this different hearing. So I remember, I think that this is a very interesting connection. When I came back to Brazil after 7 years in Spain, I had just finished my doctorate in political science. I remember that during the month that I had just arrived in Brazil, I arrived with this hope of developing some work. So I spent a lot of time studying the political interest. This word public was very present to me. Everybody always said that the comparison between living in Europe and in the United States is the sensation that the public, the community brings more to. They have a sense of community in Europe. So I understood this as a fundamental issue and difference. And so I'd like you to make some reflections about the importance of this public sphere. Going back to my corporate life, I'm not an academician anymore. My doctorate has finished and I'm here in the corporate life again. But also this concern about how can we rescue the sense of community? How can you rescue the public sphere? Because in my vision is the greatest problem. I don't know if you have read Michael Sanders' book where he criticizes the meritocracy. In practice, he is defending the construction of the sense of community because the meritocracy legitimates the segregation and the separation, differentiation among people. So it ends up being deeply divisible, devising negative for the construction of the sense of community. So in my vision, this is the greatest issue we are living and we are facing. And this problem, of course, led to the populism, political populism, and all the crises that we are facing now. I'd like to hear you a little bit about this.
I mean, I wish I were a philosopher or something and had something really clever to say here. but what I will say, you know, when I was studying political science, I got pretty and this happened actually after Donald Trump got elected. I started a second little nonprofit that I really handed off to other people, but me and a group of 7 women started meeting for 2 hours every Monday to figure out how can we be politically active on the small scale, right? And we had a range of identities covered, although all women. And the first thing that we wanted to attack was essentially we had segregation in our schools indirectly. We were busing kids in. We were in a small community of 13,000, but we were busing in Hispanic farm workers' kids from the south end of town to one of the schools with no real integration plan. Not whenever I would drop my kids off at school, the white parents wouldn't even greet the Hispanic parents. And so for me, without an organizing body like a church that used to get many different identities to gather as a central gathering point anymore, I wonder if us not, and I think sometimes I can get so grandiose and, oh, I want to get involved in the presidential election. But actually, I'm like, I didn't even know who my local mayor was in my little town, right? And I think that the way forward to gathering is, can we create more gathering in our small local community? Like I wonder, more bottom up political engagement, where our political engagement should be more centered around what's happening locally in our small towns. That's just what came to mind. And that's, you know, my 22-year-old self was super, super interested in that idea. I don't know. What do you think of that? What are your ideas?
Eu acho que a gente, no
I
fundo,
think that deep inside,
você falou de competição, né?
you talk about the competition, a sense of competition in a society that ends up emptying the selves and the spirit. So you are forced to enter in this competition that at the end impairs yourself and the others to create this sense of community, to walk in the public sphere and
Tivemos uma
listen to
experiência.
the other. So recently I had an experience because we are living in a new building, more Patricia, that has a more active hearing because of her work. So she is always trying to create a community in this building. Eh? People that live here that are our neighbors, our next door neighbors. So you have these tools of WhatsApp and the social networks, but not necessarily they assure you that you are going to be talking with people. So because you meet different people, people that are difficult to relate with, it's easier to have a relationship, of marriage, have a good marriage between two persons of different religions than of different political views. So it's something we have to be more maybe open-minded and not to stigmatize people. I don't know if here in Brazil, maybe in the United States, they say that people, Hillary Clinton said that are deplorable people, a bunch of deplorable people. And that was a great mistake because she has to talk with the different. To talk is to talk with the other, to have the capacity to interact. This week, particularly, we had an example of a political leadership that showed this capacity of leadership and interaction. When you have someone that is radicalizing and being violent in the words, then you have someone also that is able to listen to. I think that Biden, maybe you might not like him, but he is someone that stop and listen to people. So if you look for the common ground communication, we are here to help to build a better world, a better society where everybody has to live, has to live in. So it's a great challenge of this political action and this activism, I think.
You know what comes to mind as I listen to you? Something inside myself that I've really been challenging. So I'm going to be very, very reductionistic, I think. But I feel like we are all taught to transmit or to speak or to produce, right? And one of the sections in the new, we have an advanced listener training. One of the challenges that we've overdeveloped is this output as a person. And we haven't, beyond just listening, we haven't learned how to receive people. We don't know how to like settle in and be still and quiet and even find it delicious to really be in awe and wonder of somebody. And it takes an incredible amount of slowing down, and it's a skill and a practice, and I can't quite even find the words to put to it. But what I keep wondering is if we got the entire world better at doing that, we would solve this thing that you're talking about, Luis. It would be so different, because now I'm looking at Mara's face and Thaisa's face and Derlai's face and Patrizia's face and Aida's face, and I'm like, okay, I want to know their context. I want to know their history. I want to know where do they come from and what ideas do they have, and I want to know their soul, and I want to sit still with them, and I want to move with them and breathe with them. And in that stillness and receptivity of receiving the other, what might we be able to create? But we just have lost that capacity to do that, to bring someone in. Me too. I mean, I'm working on it too. I'm probably the worst, which is why I do this work. They say you teach what you most need to learn.
Muito bom, Traci. A gente tem algumas perguntas.
Traci, thank you very much. We have some questions. So Jessica wants to make a question. Jessica would like to ask directly to Traci. Jessica?
Você está ouvindo, Jéssica?
Are you listening?
Não.
No.
Thaís
No.
também colocou aqui no chat.
Thaisa Belém also wrote a question here in the chat. Would you like to ask directly? I just made a comment. Based on the proposal that she brought, that of being touched by the other. But now you provoked me, and I am going to share something. I'm going to share something as a psychologist. I'm a psychologist, and I act in the public health system, but also in the private system. But my question is, I felt like I have been called, and it has to do with a certain comprehension, little by little, of what was the issue that was disturbing me so much in these spaces, both of them, public and private. And I started to understand that it wasn't an issue with these spaces, but in my life. And I understood that this issue of incarnating, of creating soul in the world, of feeding this imaginal community. And when Traci says that about the possibility of bringing the art, of getting closer to the artists in this sense, for me, it makes a lot of sense. I started working with the art therapy because of this, because while she was talking, I started to understand also in another way how these languages can help us open our skins, our sensible pores, our hearings, our open ourselves to different languages, how we can, as psychologists, be able to feel ourselves with this sense of openness to others. So I was thinking if it's not a possible way to open our minds, to enlarge our comprehension, to, who knows, this hearing, this way of listening can be present in more space and reinvent itself. That's it.
Mm. You know where my mind went when I was listening to you, or it's two places. One place it went to was when my husband and I were preparing to have our first children. You know, I don't know if you do this in Brazil, but you go to birth preparation classes. And I had my children at home, so I definitely needed a lot of preparation. But the facilitator had us paint a picture together of, she said, I want you to imagine the things that you're afraid could happen. And then I also want you to paint the solution, but I don't want you to paint anything representational. And I remember feeling more understood and held and supported, even though there was no plan. All I had was a painting through that exercise. So that was the first association I made when I was listening to you. And then the second was there used to be, they don't have it anymore because the campground burnt down, but for about 30 years, there used to be a bluegrass festival in the San Francisco Bay Area called the Strawberry Music Festival. And the ethos of this festival was it was a sharing community. So they let more people into the campgrounds than the campgrounds were designed for. So you were really packed in tight next to other families. And at night, if you wanted, you would turn your light on and set out chairs so that, because not just musicians played on stages, but a lot of the people attending were musicians. And so you would bring your guitar or your banjo or your harmonica, and you would just go from campsite to campsite, and you would just sit down in a chair and either play along or listen with. Yeah, I also loved parenting in that community. At the time, my youngest son was 3, and he was very brave and would run off. And so we decided, well, he's really safe here. This is a safe community of people. So we took a black marker and just wrote on his chest, "This child belongs at campsite 32. If lost, please return him there." That was really fun. I wish we parented like that.
Traci, this story that you just told me has to do with the community or with your experience? Oh, okay. You're going to have another question, then we clear it out. Okay. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Thiasos. It's incredible. I can see that there's a lot of people here interested because they develop a work that's similar to what Traci said. 20 years ago, I read an article of Luiz Eduardo Soares, as a Brazilian sociologist, and he was talking about invisible people. And from this moment on, I assumed an assignment in my life that never more to look at these people on the street as invisible people. And in my work as a journalist, I had a lot of opportunities to talk with these persons and to see that the difference between me and them was very little. Sometimes just to have a house, maybe it's a difference in the life story, but they have their stories. A lot of people had studied, a lot of people had professional experiences, a lot of people they had stories, love, hate, children. So it's something very interesting that I found out. And I was very enthusiastic with this idea of working with this street listening. So I'd like to make two questions to Trace. I'd like to talk I'd like her to talk a little bit about the methodology. I think that I'd like to listen to you more talking about this because I was once following a project of donation. We were donating clothes and food, and everybody used to tell us that we were crazy to be there on the street with these people because it's very dangerous. How do you come here with an open heart without any kind of security, any kind of safety? So I also to know with her how to develop this idea of safety and what works and what does not work. And the next question is when she talked about psychotherapy as an adaptation or as a way of liberating the soul. So I'd like to ask you if liberating the soul, as liberating the soul, can we imagine a different word, a new word beyond capitalism? Not only thinking, but if it's possible, from the liberating of the soul to build a different world. Thank you.
Mm. Well, I would love to start with that last one now, the second part of your question. I don't know why, but I feel very teary with that second one, and I feel a little excited because I'd actually like the group to answer that question. And so for just a minute, I would love for all of us to daydream together about the world that we would create. Don't worry about rules. Don't worry about whether it's possible. I don't care about any of that. But how do we even create it if we don't have a space to dream about it? So just for a minute, can we just sit in silence and dream for a second about that, about the second piece that Viana just brought up? If we're going to liberate the soul, can we imagine a new world? What's the world that we can imagine? How would you set it up? You're welcome to type in the chat or just think of it for yourself or take yourself off mute. Mm. I'm just curious if anyone feels compelled to respond in voice that question that Viana mentioned about what you're imagining in this world.
Oi. Eu fiquei pensando nessa.
Hello. I was thinking while she was talking about the listening as an equal of being really together and let me get moved by the other. And when the other realizes that I've been moved, by this other. I think that this makes a difference. The real consideration towards the other one realizes that he really moved me. I think that for me today, it's what makes the difference.
Mm. Mm. Thank you. What came to mind when I was sitting with your question was I had a conversation. I don't know if you have art of hosting communities in Brazil, but I got to interview Toke Paluden Muller, who's a Danish man who, when we started our interview, he actually went back and talked about, his heritage. And he shared with me that schooling for children in Denmark was always about teaching children about being good citizens, not teaching them to be good workers. And so that was the first association I made. I'm like, oh gosh, we probably have to start first with how we're socializing kids, right? And then the second place was, oh, and we also probably need to there was an indigenous teacher who I was listening to, and he was talking about how our original connection with nature was so profound that we were in communication with the trees and the rivers and the stones. I don't know if that's possible because I've never experienced it, but I wonder about this idea that our connection to our body and to nature would also be part of how we become a soulful human. So we're good citizens and we're connected to our bodies and nature. Those were the two things that came up in me just initially. Before I answer Crispiana's other question, I just wanted to make space for any other imaginings that people had about this new world where we were liberating the soul.
Eu só queria fazer, eu concordo plenamente com a questão eu
I
dou
just would
aula
like to say that I agree totally with what said. I give some lessons in a popular course, and this year I had this opportunity of giving classes about sociology and also the lessons about the being a citizenship. And it's 2 hours and a half of trying to teach citizenship to these youngsters because it's what lacks in Brazil nowadays. Not only in Brazil, I'm talking Brazil as in general, but it's people don't understand how community work, how a society that calls itself a democratic state, how does it work? So, for example, we are having here, I don't know if you know, Tracy, but here in Brazil with the pandemics, we are arriving 300,000 deaths. So it's a tragedy in a society that not only elected a completely disqualified person, but that struggles against the vaccine. So it's something crazy. So it's really something crazy. So we he is playing against the vaccination, something illogical. And we look at this and see that people is a little bit is a portrait of this society, of an extreme individualism, and they don't understand what is to build a society, how society works. So it's a key issue. Or we really teach these youngsters that they are citizens before being consumers, or we are not going to have a future because being a citizen gives you a dimension of respect towards the community, towards towards the earth, towards the nature. So I think this is something really important, if you allow me to say.
Mm. I don't have an answer. It sounds a little hopeless, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. I keep feeling like we're looking for some, when I think about, well, first of all, I'm fascinated by what is the symbol of the vaccine? Like, I would love to know your thoughts on that. Please analyze that one. Like, what is the fear of the vaccine? It's this thing that goes into your body and it's going to potentially infect you or control you. Some people think it's going to be a controlling device. And yet, the figurehead who's telling us not to take the vaccine is in fact the controlling device. So it's very interesting to me. It almost, when I play around with this idea, I keep feeling that we have these wishes for a savior. And we keep wanting this strong man to come in and save us so that we don't actually have to participate in social solidarity, so that we don't actually have to mature. We'd rather, I almost feel like it's, and I know this part of me, I'd rather just sit in Donald Trump's lap and drink from his breast. I know this sounds really gross, but that there's something about us that's kind of been infantilized in a way, and we just want to believe what mommy and daddy tell us, and we don't actually want to. I mean, there's a whole sector of people that do engage, don't get me wrong, but there's a whole section of people that are longing for this return to the mother's lap, it feels like. And that's, as long as we have that, right, then it's going to be easy to come in and control people and get them to believe what you want to believe. And the characters that we're drawn to are the tough guys. Those are the ones that we feel are going to protect us. And, so I'm just fascinated by this right now, and I'm not sure what to do about it, but I'm fascinated by it. Shall I just, before we move on, shall I answer Christiana's first question, or we can save it for a little bit if there's places we're going? Okay. So,
Sim, claro. A gente tem a pergunta da Cris, Traci, mais 3 perguntas já na fila, tá bom?
Okay, Trace, we have Chris' question and also 3 other questions on the
okay,
row.
so I'll be quick. So I have a particular stance about listening to folks who are experiencing homelessness, that we have to respect their sovereignty. And I've had a rule at Sidewalk Talk that you don't go into a homeless encampment unless you're invited in. Because in fact, it's our lens that believes that somehow they are not well, or that somehow they're not okay. But in listening to many, many, many people without houses, so let me say the logistics. I've always partnered with another organization that has already been invited in. So Lava May is a mobile shower unit for homeless in San Francisco. They turned old city buses into showers. They even have some of them with washing machines where the folks without homes can wash their clothes. And so we would sit outside their buses, so that creates a level of safety. And they started putting up a pop-up care village where it was really fun, actually. It was very safe. I took my children with me to volunteer there, and we had listeners there. And the folks could choose to come and be listened to. And we had a partnership with them for about 3 years. And so by the end, some of the folks that were not housed also became listeners alongside of us. So we would show up, and it would be a mix of people that had homes and not homes. And they would set up chairs and sit, and we would all listen together. It was safe because there was a communal space created by an organization, and there had been a relationship built. I don't actively go into unsafe neighborhoods. We have one chapter that does listen in the Tenderloin. She's a minister, but she still holds the listening as equals. And she goes out there every week, and she's been going out every week into the Tenderloin in San Francisco for 5 years. And she is now a fixture in the community. And it's just she and one other woman, and they're both in their 70s. And they sit there and they do not give advice. They don't give food. They sometimes hear pretty dark stuff. And she's trained in acute crisis mental health, so she feels very safe in those spaces too, because that's a population she works with. But she does sit out front of a food network that does have a security guard inside. So there's also some level of safety. But what begins to happen is you become one of the community. Like, she knows half the folks' names that walk by. They know her name, right? The last thing I'll say is I have had listening sessions with folks that don't have homes. And one of them, I felt really changed after listening to them, and like, wow, he's right and I'm wrong. And I don't think I have to get that binary, but he said, why would I want to live in a home? I know you keep wanting to get me in a home. I don't want to live in a home. I wake up every morning under the stars. You don't. I don't actually have this alarm clock that goes off, and the stress that you have to get to your job and get everything done. I don't live that way. I listen to the birds singing, and I get a little bit moist because the fog rolls in. You don't have that. He says, the way that you're living your life is absolutely nuts to me. This is what he says to me. And so I don't approach folks that are living on the streets the same way. I first ask them about them and do they want to be living there? And I've met several that have zero interest in moving into a house, that everything about society is just fucked to them. Oh, sorry. Uh, but I get it. Like, there's something really, really important we have to listen to there. Okay. What are the other questions, Patricia?
Tracy, só queria compartilhar que nós
I
tivemos uma
just would
experiência.
like to share with you that we had an experience a little bit before the pandemics with the street population, and my sensation was the same. Nobody wanted to leave the streets. We really have to get there with a lot of attention, with a lot of caution, because nobody wanted to leave. And this was very interesting. Elizabeth now has a question. Elizabeth?
Não?
Não, eu sou Elizabeth Maria.
Acho que sim. Para mim apareceu só Neves. Mas é você.
Okay.
Não,
Okay, Elizabeth.
interferência. Eu
I just
gostando bastante, mas eu
would like to
fiquei
interact.
provocada em vários momentos.
I'm
Me
enjoying
coloquei.
so much,
Obrigada.
but I felt kind of provoked so many times. But I wrote in the chat. Okay, so now Patricia Bahia. Hello, Tracy. It was a pleasure to listen to you. I'd like to share with you some sensations I had.
Mm.
I took part in a group as a therapist once, and we went to the streets to talk to people, but not as therapists, as people. And it was very interesting because the first sensation that we had was that nobody would like to talk to us. Okay, and I say, oh, we are crazy. We're trying to talk to people that really maybe will not be willing to talk to us. But it was the opposite. People were always very happy to talk to us. And I had a supervisor that he used to do something very nice. He used to go to a park in Rio de Janeiro, and he would bring many times a patient or another to take a walk during the session and to talk walking in the park. And it's something that Socrates used to do there in the ancient past. But why am I talking about this? Because I think that creativity in the moment that we are with our patients. Today we are here having our faces in these screens. So we really have to reinvent this creativity as soon as we had an opportunity to go back, né, to our practice, to feel love to this patient, really, and to allow ourselves the freedom to create a new space in this square that we have in front of us all
Mm.
the time. I like to ask if it's possible to do it, and how can we do it?
Just to ask, do you mean the video square or the square of the room, or both?
Não, aqui do Zoom mesmo, né? Que a gente
No,
está
no, I'm
atendendo.
talking about the square in the video, because we are seeing people through Zoom
Yeah,
nowadays.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I imagine that we all already are, just because of the way we use our imaginations, right? I'm trying to think a little bit about what the differences have been. I'll tell you, one of the most surprising or interesting things that's come up for me since doing video therapy is exactly what's happening with Luis right now. So if you can all look at Luis, he just leaned in and put his face into his cat's face, right? And I have gotten to see parts of my clients interacting with their pets that I normally wouldn't get to experience, that shows me a part of them that I normally wouldn't experience. Sometimes I show them things. Sometimes I had a girlfriend, I was telling a friend of mine, I like animals. That's the other thing I key in. I have a new friend in uh, the Netherlands. I like people from the Netherlands, it turns out. I didn't know a lot of people from the Netherlands until I moved to Germany. And I said, oh, I really miss having a cat. So she mailed me a cat through the mail. And so sometimes I show clients little things on my desk if it comes up in the session. You know, I don't know, I have this little, oops, I have this little container my son made me. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Bert Hellinger's family constellation work. My mother-in-law is a certified Bert Hellinger family constellation therapist. So I have all these objects on my desk, partly because I make constellations with them. And you can make constellations on the video. And I've been in some group sessions, not my individual therapy sessions. It's very similar to sand tray, where you can do sand tray work using the video. I bet some of the folks here in this room have been doing that already. Some of the sand tray folks probably been doing that. I can't do it because my computer is terrible, but another colleague of mine, she actually puts up different backgrounds depending in the moment, like she'll change it. She has one that's a video of a flame. And so depending on what's going on with her and the client, she'll shift the background, which I find fascinating, right? Or that the client chooses, like she has a menu of backgrounds and she'll change the backgrounds based on what's happening in the client. I'm like, wow, that's like super cool. I put on music. So maybe it's not so easy to use music in your office, but it is on your video. You can certainly show videos. So there's some potential. I don't think I have been brave enough to use some of the tools that some of my other friends use, but I think the possibility is there. I think the possibility is there. It sounds like you feel drawn to, though, Patricia.
Yes, yes, I'm very interested in art, in movement. I think that the physical presence in the video sometimes it gets a little bit frozen. We are kind of frozen there. So I think that to produce elements and provocations, I think it's very interesting that what you said. Very interesting. Thank you.
Bom, alguém tem mais alguma pergunta?
Does anybody else have a question?
Final.
We are reaching our ending time.
Eu
Does
tenho
it?
uma pergunta para
I have a question, Traci. Patricia. First, I'd like to make a comment. I was very happy to know that we are not going to have a Sidewalk Talk app. Yeah, even if I'm very well adapted to this reality, this was a concern that I had. We could talk a little bit more about this experience that we've been having connected with the Sidewalk Talk during the pandemics. We have just a reading circle once a month about racism, but not online conversations. But to know that we're not going to have an app really makes me happy. And also to know that you started in San Francisco and now that you are in a small town in Germany, and also all the conversations that you have with the volunteers. I'd like to know what's the difference between working in San Francisco and then in working in Heideggen. About like here in Brazil, like for example, working in São Paulo, working in Rio, completely different because of the landscapes and the soul of the city. So I'd like to know, they listen from you, what's the difference between San Francisco and Heideggen, Germany, and the soul landscapes and how the soul transits in different spaces.
So I'll first say that I've only listened 3 times in Germany. I've been doing some online listening with an international women's group where it's not all Germans. It's women from all over the world who all speak English. So some women are German. I'm a bit in some. So when I first arrived in Germany, I really kind of I was idealizing Germany and de-idealizing the United States, and now I'm missing home a lot because I am such an open, emotional sharer. I'm very Californian that way. I also freely share my anxieties and neuroses, and I think I perhaps did that without enough cultural context. So I haven't had an easy time community building here. I just find it very rigid. And I have felt some anti-Americanism as well. And I am like the poster child of, I'm loud, I speak a lot, I move freely in my body, I wear a big flower on my shirt, I wear red lipstick. I mean, and I haven't been interested in altering those aspects of myself to fit in here. So I think a few of the Sidewalk Talk German folks haven't been super excited to have Traci Ruble in Germany, to be quite honest. But have I stopped? I haven't stopped. I've just found places where I'm welcome. And it's part of what instigated me joining a women's group. And one of the women in my women's group is a New Zealander who lives in Switzerland. And she's a United Nations human rights attorney. And she's turned me on to Erin Meyer's work called Culture Maps, where she's just studied, done surveys cross-culturally. It helps you understand the nuance of different cultures. And that's really helped me cultivate empathy for the differences between what is, Californians, even amongst the United States, are much more open, right? So if you go to other states in the United States, like the Midwest, people don't share as much. If you go to the South, people are very friendly and polite, but they don't share vulnerabilities. Californians, a lot of them go to therapy. There's a lot of openness. There's a lot of racial diversity. So California is like its own country inside the United States, it feels like sometimes. But I have made friends with this fellow in Berlin, and he started it. I helped him in the beginning. I'll probably be taking my name off the website because I haven't helped him since. But in the international consortium called the Togetherness Hub, I'll put it in the chat. He just brought together leading thinkers and researchers all over the world to think about loneliness. And he's a German guy, but he's a very unusual German guy. He's super open, super like big and friendly. And he even told me, I interviewed him recently for the podcast. He says, I'm a little bit crazy for a German because he's so open. So I'm finding my way. I'm going to make a trip up to Berlin to see him, and we're going to do a listening event up there. I also met a lovely person in the Netherlands. I'm going to go up and do a listening event with her. And then I met a lovely fellow in Paris. And then one of the original San Francisco listeners is in Paris. So we're going to go do a listening event there. Yeah, so it's new, it's different. I think the hardest is I don't speak German. And then I kind of feel like I'm like, oh, I shrink a little bit because I don't know how to communicate. But that's a good experience for me to feel too.
Traci, eu fiquei imaginando como ele achou.
Tracy, I was imagining, wondering what they would think about a Brazilian.
Just come, I'll have your back.
Bom, pode vir, eu vou ajudar vocês. Oh,
Lua.
Sorry, I spoke in Portuguese in your channel.
Paty, posso fazer uma pergunta para vocês duas?
Oh, Luciana would like to make a question to Tracy and Patricia. I'd like to listen a little bit more about the Sidewalk project during the pandemics. Of course, the initial morning of the pandemics, and then how did you reinvent yourselves with this project during the pandemics?
Aqui no Brasil, inclusive, Paty, quero saber de você
In
também.
Brazil also, Patricia, I'd like to listen to you.
Patricia, why don't you go first?
Acho que alguém está com o microfone aberto.
I think someone has the microphone open, so she's asking.
Parece que tem vento.
Sounds like a wind.
Para nós está normal.
Então acho que é aqui. Acho que é uma ótima pergunta.
Lu, I think it's a very good question.
Na verdade, eu acho que ainda estou elaborando esse luto.
Truly, I'm still working with this mourning. And listening to Tracy, I realized how much I miss the streets and this experience. At the beginning of the pandemics, we tried to listen to the elderly, to the elders, but it wasn't very successful. We are still adapting ourselves. We had a few people, but the few people we had was very rich. And in the middle of the pandemics, we had the George Floyd's event, and we started to discuss racism, and we have this readings circle, which is monthly, in a monthly basis. It's a very interesting community that was formed to discuss this issue of the racism. And in the next semester, we're going to read more 6 books around this issue. And also we have the expectation of starting a letter project, writing letters as an attempt to make, since we are not sure of when we are going back to the streets, so we are trying to create these interaction spaces. But I can tell you, I can assure you, but that I'm still mourning. I haven't overcome yet.
I just feel grateful for the invitation to think about my mourning, because as I listen to Patricia and feel in my own heart, it's almost brings tears to my eyes, because my own sense of soul, when I would listen on the sidewalk, would really come forward. And so it's a piece of my life that's missing. I've thought about some of these other campaigns like letters, and I'm really trying to do less. I've discovered that I hate doing operations and coordination. And I was offering too much of myself doing those kinds of things. So I've been doing little small things. I have an elderly man that lives across the street. I don't know his name, but he comes out, and it's the biggest joy of my day that he walks 3 times a day with his walker out front of my window. And this is my psychotherapy office. So I'm still holding about 45 psychotherapy clients. So I'm still really busy doing psychotherapy work in San Francisco. But he's meaningful to me because he's my community. So I've started drawing him pictures and leaving them on his walker, unbeknownst to him. Sometimes I bought a bunch of little things. I'll show you. Hold on. I guess I've turned this into quite a project, but I leave little silly things on his walker. This is an ice cream cone. Or I'll leave a sticker. And I have no idea if he enjoys it. And I don't leave them every day because I don't want to overwhelm him. So it's every 3 days. And I just get a chuckle. I think I've seen his wife find them, and I think she might enjoy them more than he does sometimes.
Mini donuts.
And then I mail these to my niece. I have a niece in Dresden as well. So there's 2 beneficiaries. My big dream right now that I really want to do, but my husband told me that it's way too American and he won't participate with me, is just in my neighborhood. I want to have because my husband's German, I want to see if I can get the 10 houses on this side of the street and the 10 houses on the other side of the street to all put a table and chairs in their driveway, and to have a street-wide tea party where we won't necessarily interact because of social distancing, but we'll just all be out on the street having tea or lunch and see each other. And I really wanted to hire a musician to come walk up and down the street and play music for us. And my husband thinks this is just crazy. But then another friend of mine says, you must do this. So this is what I really want to do right now, because I don't think I'm going to get a vaccine until September. So I think I might do this thing and have to do it by myself. And all these neighbors are going to think it's super weird.
Do it, do it.
So I really appreciate how warm and welcoming
Christina is telling you to do it.
I heard her.
I would say your husband is too German.
He's also an introvert.
Traci, eu espero que você faça e vou esperar o vídeo.
Traci, I really hope that you do it, and I'm going to be waiting here for the video, registering the event.
Okay, maybe you'll give me courage.
Para encerrar esse nosso encontro, eu queria te dar de presente.
So to conclude our meeting, I'd like to give you as a gift an image, a picture of our last project in the streets. It's from March 7th. A boy, more or less 9 years old. We were in a market, in a square market, and the mother of this child came to me and said, you know, my son likes very much to talk to. I don't have too much patience, so would you like to talk to him? And I said, of course. And he sat down. And we were there 2 hours and 10 minutes talking. And the mother didn't come back. And he told me that he really enjoyed talking. And I asked him about what he would like to talk to me. And since we were in a park near the central part of São Paulo, there were many trees behind me. He was facing the trees. And he said to me, I'd like to talk about the trees. Have you ever thought about the grandiosity of the wood and the grandiosity of the trees? So I'd like to talk to you about the trees. Is that okay? Can we talk about the trees? Would you talk to me about the trees? And I said, of course. Let's talk about the grandiosity of the trees. And from this initial point, he talked to me about his life, and it was a great meeting of 2 hours. So I'd like to deeply thank you for this project.
Luis, there's the boy that's going to change the world.
We need more than more boys like this in the world.
Keep listening.
Então, esse é o presente que eu te dou. Agradeço imensamente.
So this is the gift that I like to give you. I really deeply thank you. Thank you. Really thank you.
Patricia, this goes all the way into my heart. I love this image, and I can tell by the smiles on people's faces that I don't think I'm the only one receiving this gift in this moment. I think we're all going to be thinking about this boy today, and we're probably all going to be looking at trees today a lot. So thank you for giving all of us this gift. It means a lot. And to this boy, wherever he is, let's just say thank you to him for bestowing his gift on us. Yeah. This is what's awesome about listening, is you get to feel this kind of magic coming from people, and you ignite it over and over and over again, and we keep igniting it in each other. I mean, feel how ignited we all feel right now. The grandiosity of the world and the trees. Wow. So cool.
Então é isso, gente. Queria agradecer muito. Lu, obrigada.
So that's it. I really would like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank you, Traci. I like to thank Marcos that gave us the opportunity. Thank you so much, Traci. It was a wonderful, wonderful meeting. Unforgettable. Next Friday, we have Peck Burnett. Peck Burnett. We'll wait for you there. Thank you.
Beijo, beijo, Traci.
Thank you so much, Traci.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. How do I say thank you in Portuguese?
Obrigada.
Português? Obrigada.
Obrigada, obrigada, obrigada.
Thank you.
Beijo.